This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about MicroStrategy's bold new Bitcoin play. If you've been following my channel for a while, and especially if you saw this video, you've done really well. This is when I first covered MicroStrategy and talked about how they had been buying Bitcoin with all of their cash. I said that the stock could triple in 1 year. That's back when the stock was trading at about $137 a share. It's currently up at $336 a share. So I may have even been a bit too conservative in my targets. I should mention while we're here that if you enjoy this kind of video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. So now there's new news coming out of MicroStrategy this morning, and it's sort of to answer the question, you become a hardcore Bitcoiner, you've spent all your cash on Bitcoin, as Michael Saylor has done with MicroStrategy. He's Michael Saylor is the CEO of MicroStrategy, and he basically took hundreds of millions of dollars of their cash and turned it into Bitcoin as an inflation hedge, as of a hedge against the melting ice cube that is the US dollar. And so what do you do when you've spent all of your cash on Bitcoin and you're still bullish? You borrow money. And this is actually not as irresponsible as it sounds, especially if you do it through a corporate structure. Now, this is really the reason this is the ultimate Bitcoiner fantasy, is because you're borrowing in a currency that you're almost certain is going to lose value, lose purchasing power over time. You're basically borrowing funny money and using it to buy real money, which is Bitcoin, which is scarce, which holds its value over time. On the other hand, the US dollar loses value over time, and so you know that your debt will become easier and easier to pay off. This is very similar to what people do when they take out a mortgage to buy a house. It's a very smart thing to do as long as you don't borrow more money than you can make the monthly payments on, but you basically are buying an asset that's relatively scarce, a house that goes up, almost always goes up, especially over long periods of time, and you're buying it with borrowed money, which loses value over time. So everyone knows people who have maybe $1 million homes that they paid $80,000 for many years ago. This is the basic trade, but the trade is on steroids if you do it with something like Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has the tendency to go up so much against the US dollar. And if you see my other videos on this channel, you'll see the fundamental reasons for this. This is not just a pump and dump. Bitcoin is a superior money technology that's taking over the world like superior technologies do, like the iPhone did, etc. Now, the problem with waiting until you actually earn those US dollars to buy Bitcoin, especially if you're someone like Michael Saylor and you have this company, is that if Bitcoin goes up a lot, so he could continue to buy Bitcoin just using the profits that his company's making. But what if he wants to make a much larger purchase now, as Bitcoin is entering the most bullish part of the cycle, which is really that 18 months following the halving, which we had in May 2020. So it does make sense to sort of front run this and borrow the money up front and pay it off over time. And on a side note, it occurred to me that this is really, as I was preparing this video, this is really what smart governments worldwide should be doing, since they do control printing presses. Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy can borrow money. Governments actually have a printing press. They could just print up some extra money and buy Bitcoin. There may be central banks and whole countries that are doing this now. But let's look at what MicroStrategy is doing, what Michael Saylor is doing there. They just announced this morning a private offering of $400 million of convertible senior notes. So I've been getting a lot of questions this morning what exactly this means, what a convertible senior note is. And so I'll give you a brief version of it. I don't have a background as an investment banker, so there are lots of little fine points here that I might skim over. But the basic idea is they're going to borrow $400 million in the capital markets, in the debt markets, and they're going to use it to buy even more Bitcoin. And in order to do this, in order to borrow the money, MicroStrategy is going to issue a special type of bond that we said is called a senior convertible note. Now, note is just another word for a bond. And like many bonds, this bond will pay interest twice a year. I think he said May and December or something like that in the announcement. So it's like a bond. It pays you interest a couple times a year. It's called a senior note simply because it is ahead of all the other bondholders in all the other bonds and debt securities in the company. So what senior means is if the company were to ever enter something like bankruptcy, which is very unlikely for MicroStrategy, you have, if you own a senior note, you have a senior claim ahead of everyone else against the assets of the company and whatever else can be liquidated. In this case, it's actually Bitcoin that could be liquidated. Presumably, the only scenario where MicroStrategy could run into a lot of trouble is if Bitcoin goes down a lot, which I think is very, very unlikely. But again, that's something you have to decide for yourselves. The only bondholders that are ahead of a senior note are the secured debt holders. And these are usually bank loans that are backed, that are collateralized. They're backed by collateral. So maybe there's the company rented, this is more for industrial companies, they rented a big machine. They borrowed money from a bank to purchase a big machine, and that bank loan is collateralized or secured by that machine. But basically, when you see senior convertible note, you know you're very high up in the capital structure, and you have a claim ahead of all the other bondholders and ahead of the shareholders, the equity holders, the stockholders, which is how most bonds function. They're always ahead in the capital structure. Now, it's also called a convertible note. It's a senior convertible note. Convertible just means it's convertible into something, whether cash or stock. Convertibles are normally convertible into shares of stock. So it's basically a bond that contains this embedded call option that allows the bondholder to convert his bond, his note, to shares of stock at a certain point in time and subject to certain conditions. Now, it's still not totally clear from the press release. We'll look at it in a minute from now. All the details here, all the bells and whistles. Some of that will be decided, including the interest rate. That will be sort of set by where the debt underwriters think they can issue this debt. So why would someone want to buy a convertible note? Well, if the stock price crashes, you still have the bond and you still get paid interest unless the company really has a lot of trouble. But MicroStrategy, they make money every quarter, and so they can use their cash flow from operations, their free cash flow, to pay interest on the debt. So if the stock price crashes, you're not super affected because you own the bonds, the senior notes. But if the stock goes up a lot, you will have an option to convert. This is the embedded call option we're talking about. If you're a senior convertible note holder, you have the option to convert your note or bond into shares of the stock. And so if the stock goes up a lot, you can profit from this. Usually there's some sort of cap, or there's some point at which the bonds can be callable or the stock can be called away. There are lots of ways of structuring this. The most famous example of this that I remember, a really smart example, was what Jeff Bezos did with Amazon in 1999. The stock had really gotten ahead of itself. He was an ex-hedge fund guy. He recognized this. And so the company obviously wasn't making any money back in 1999, had huge expenses. They needed to raise some money. And so what he did is he issued convertible debt. And the nice thing about issuing convertible debt is you pay a lower interest rate, which is very good for a startup like Amazon. And then what happened is the stock crashed shortly after that, starting in 2000, and those call options became very far out of the money. So it's a pretty sophisticated structure, and it makes sense for MicroStrategy to use convertible notes simply because they will be able to issue them because they contain this embedded call option. The buyers of these notes will accept a lower interest rate in exchange, which means a lower ongoing cost of payment for Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. Now, the only problem with this is that when you issue convertible debt, it eventually does end up getting converted into shares of stock, which increases the shares outstanding for your company. In other words, you end up with more shares or more slices of the pie. If you think of the company ownership, equity ownership in the company as a pie, shares of stock are just little slices of that pie. So there are going to be more slices, but this usually doesn't matter if you're confident that the pie itself will get bigger. This is what ultimately happened with Amazon. I think those were 20-year bonds, so the holders definitely did well. Amazon was certainly trading much higher in 2009 than it was, 10-year bonds in 2009 than it was in 1999. So this is what a senior convertible debt is. I'll link to this old Wall Street Journal article about the Amazon convertible bond issue. But here's the MicroStrategy announcement. They are going to, we can see down here, MicroStrategy intends to invest the net proceeds from the sale of the notes in Bitcoin, pending identification of working capital needs, etc. So they're going to make sure they have enough money to keep running the company, and then they're going to try to put the majority of the $400 million into Bitcoin. We can see here that these are 5-year notes. I guess they'll be issued approximately December 15th. These are really only available to large institutional investors. You might be able to get a piece of this through your Schwab account once it's eventually out, but probably not. So these are 5-year bonds, 5-year notes, and they can be redeemed at par, which is at 100 in 3 years from now. They're also convertible into cash. This is the convertible note part of it. They're convertible into cash, shares of stock, or a combination. This hasn't all been worked out. Prior to June 15, 2025, the notes will be convertible only upon the occurrence of certain events and during certain periods, etc. So we don't know exactly how this is going to be structured, but the general takeaway, and the one that's important to us, is that MicroStrategy has told everyone, has told the market that they are going to go out and buy $400 million worth of Bitcoin over the coming months. Now, they currently already have 40,824 Bitcoin right now. If they spend $400,000 right at current prices, which I'm not sure they can do, I think this will continue to drive up the price of Bitcoin as they get in, all else being equal. But if they could buy it right here where Bitcoin's trading at 19,000, that would be about 21,000 more Bitcoin added to the MicroStrategy treasury. And so you take their existing holdings plus that 21,000, you end up with about 61,876 total Bitcoin. Now, when Bitcoin goes to 100,000, which I expect it to do sometime before the end of next year, probably sometime in the summer, we'll hit 100,000 if we stay on track. The value of those Bitcoin, that 62,000 Bitcoin, will be 6.2 billion. I think there's a very good chance actually that we get to 200,000 by the very end of next year, in which case the Bitcoin on their balance sheet, on MicroStrategy's balance sheet, will be worth more, north of 12 billion. And between now and then, they might even be able to borrow more, issue more senior convertible debt, and buy even more Bitcoin, also buy more Bitcoin with their free cash flow. So this is a situation where the company could be valued at minimum, just based on its Bitcoin holdings, at about 12 billion. The current market cap is about 3 billion. So this gives, if everything works out well, and again, none of this is investment advice, it gives you about 4x. The market could, the stock could go about 4x from here. So instead of being a $3 billion company, it would be, which is the current market cap, it could be a $12 billion company. A $6 billion company when Bitcoin's at 100,000, that would be sort of the lower bound. And a $12 billion company when Bitcoin is at 200,000. Now, this is still a very conservative move for MicroStrategy. They have a market cap, as we said, of about 3 billion, and they currently don't have any debt. They have a very small amount of debt, about $105 million worth of debt, and you subtract out their cash of about 50 million. So the company is not levered up at all. It only has about 50 million in debt, sort of net debt when you net out the cash. For a $3 billion company, that's very, very conservative. You can see companies that have a $3 billion market cap and have $3 billion worth of debt. This is sort of what Tesla used to look like. And so this means that there's quite a bit of upside for MicroStrategy itself, as well as for Bitcoin. I think if you Bitcoin is still a better investment here. If you think Bitcoin's going to 200,000, that's about 10x from here. MicroStrategy would go up approximately 4x from here. As we said, the thing about Bitcoin is it will keep going up if Plan B's plan, his model, holds. So I still like Bitcoin over MicroStrategy, but MicroStrategy might be a good holding if you want to hold it in your 401k or your IRA or some tax advantaged retirement account, where it can be a little bit more difficult to buy Bitcoin itself. And just wanted to finish up a great tweet by Psychedelic El Barto, pointing out that Saylor's basically announced that there's $400 million more money coming into Bitcoin, and it makes a lot of sense to get in of Bitcoin ahead of this. This is just one company. This is still a fairly small company on the NASDAQ. Huge institutional money flows coming into Bitcoin over the next 12 months. And we spent a lot of time focusing on MicroStrategy, but they're still a very, very tiny player. If you look at Apple and Amazon and Facebook and Google and Microsoft and Netflix and all the FANG stocks, all the large tech stocks, and you look at how much cash they have on their balance sheet, they can put literally billions and billions of dollars into Bitcoin and still use up only 1, 3, 5% of their cash holdings. I think we reached a point at some point where every S&P 500 company has a portion of their treasury reserves, a portion of their sort of stable cash held in Bitcoin as a currency hedge against this melting dollar. But for those of you who are following this ahead of time, Michael Saylor has really given all of us a gift ahead of the holidays, saying more money coming into Bitcoin. I think this is just more good news for Bitcoin holders. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.